First contact gone wrong. He touched the wrong body part. Again. The diplomatic disaster captain Marcus Webb scratched his stubbled chin as he stared at the massive alien vessel through the viewport of the UES Wanderer. The ship looked like someone had crossed a cathedral with a jellyfish, all flowing curves and impossible angles that hurt to look at directly. After 3 months of traveling through deep space, this first contact situation was supposed to be humanity's grand debut on the Galactic stage. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Vorthak delegation," announced Lieutenant Danny Torres from the communications console. His usually steady voice carried a hint of nervousness that made Webb's stomach clench. "Put them through, Torres." Webb straightened his dress uniform, trying to look more diplomatic than he felt. The main screen flickered to life, revealing 3 towering alien figures. The Vorthak were impressive beings, standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms each and skin that shimmered like oil on water. Their leader wore elaborate robes covered in symbols that seemed to move when Webb wasn't looking directly at them. "Greetings, humans of the vessel Wanderer." The lead Vorthak spoke through the universal translator, its voice deep and resonant. "I am High Arbiter Zix Thala. We welcome you to this sacred space of first meeting." Webb stepped forward, fighting the urge to wipe his sweaty palms on his pants. "Thank you, High Arbiter. I'm Captain Marcus Webb, representing the United Earth Systems. We're honored by this opportunity for peaceful contact." "The honor is mutual, Captain Webb. However, before we may proceed with formal negotiations, you must observe our traditional greeting ceremony. It is essential for diplomatic relations." Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, standing behind Webb, muttered under his breath. "Here we go with the alien customs." Webb shot him a warning look. "Of course, High Arbiter. We respect your traditions. What does the ceremony involve?" Zix Thala's 4 arms moved in what might have been a graceful gesture. "You must approach our cultural harmony specialist, Velnara, and perform the touching of understanding. It is a simple gesture where you place your hand upon her sacred vessel of wisdom." A second Vorthak stepped forward, smaller than Zix Thala, but no less imposing. Her robes were different, more form-fitting and decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with their own light. She stood with dignity, her forearms positioned in what Webb assumed was a formal pose. "I understand," Webb said, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Lieutenant Torres, you're with me. Morrison, keep monitoring our systems." As they prepared to transport over to the Vorthak ship, Dr. Rachel Voss, the expedition's xenobiologist, grabbed Webb's arm. "Captain, we don't know enough about their physiology. Be careful where you touch. What's sacred to them might be different from what we expect." Webb nodded grimly. "Noted, Doc. But we can't afford to mess this up. Earth needs these trade agreements." The transport beam deposited Webb and Torres in a vast chamber aboard the Vorthak vessel. The walls were alive with bioluminescent patterns, and the air hummed with an energy that made their teeth ache. Zix Thala and Velnara stood waiting, surrounded by dozens of other Vorthak observers. "Captain Webb," Zix Thala intoned, "approach, Velnara, and place your hand upon her sacred vessel of wisdom. This will seal our mutual understanding and respect." Webb walked forward slowly, his boots echoing in the strange chamber. Velnara remained perfectly still, her large eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was both welcoming and unnerving. He raised his hand, trying to figure out where exactly this sacred vessel of wisdom might be located. The Vorthak had 4 arms, so maybe it was held in one of her hands? Or perhaps it was a ceremonial object she wore. Webb's mind raced as he approached, aware that dozens of alien eyes were watching his every move. "Just place your hand gently." Velnara spoke for the first time, her voice melodic and strangely soothing. Webb reached out, aimed for what he thought might be a ceremonial ornament on her chest, and made contact. The moment his palm touched the smooth, warm surface, every Vorthak in the chamber gasped in unison. Velnara's eyes widened to twice their normal size, and her skin began changing colors rapidly. "Oh no," Torres whispered behind him. Zix Thala's voice boomed through the chamber, But the words coming through the translator made Webb's blood run cold. The human has touched the fertility blessing. By ancient law, they are now bonded for life. The unwanted wedding. The Vorthak chamber erupted into what Webb could only describe as organized chaos. Dozens of aliens began moving in complex patterns around him and Velnara, their arms weaving through the air while they chanted in harmonious tones that the universal translator couldn't process. Meanwhile, Webb stood frozen with his hand still pressed against what he now realized was definitely not a ceremonial ornament. "Captain," Torres hissed, "I think you need to move your hand." "I'm afraid to," Webb replied through gritted teeth. Velnara was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read, her skin still cycling through colors like a living mood ring. Zixthala approached them, his massive form somehow managing to look both apologetic and amused. "Captain Webb, I must inform you that you have just completed the ritual of eternal partnership. In our culture, touching another's fertility blessing is the most sacred form of marriage proposal." "Marriage?" Webb's voice cracked like a teenager's. "But I was just trying to be respectful, and your respect has been noted and reciprocated," Zixthala continued. "Velnara has accepted your proposal by not immediately vaporizing you with her defensive capabilities. Congratulations." Back on the Wanderer, the crew watched the proceedings through the ship's sensors with growing horror. Chief Morrison turned to Dr. Voss, who was frantically scrolling through her xenobiological databases. "Doc, please tell me there's some kind of cultural escape clause here," Morrison pleaded. I'm looking," Dr. Voss muttered, her fingers flying across her tablet. "Wait, here's something. According to the cultural files we received, the Vorthak do have a tradition called the Trial of Compatibility. If the bonded pair can't demonstrate suitable partnership skills within 3 standard days, the marriage is considered void." "What kind of skills?" asked Ensign Katie Park from the navigation console. "It says here they must successfully complete a series of challenges that test their ability to work together, communicate effectively, and—" Dr. Voss paused, her face reddening. "Share intimate knowledge of each other's bodies." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems. Meanwhile, on the Vorthak vessel, Webb was getting a crash course in interspecies diplomacy. Velnara, it turned out, could speak perfect English when she wasn't being formal. "Look, Captain Webb," she said, her skin finally settling into a pleasant shade of blue-green. "I know this is awkward for both of us, but in Vorthak society, backing out of an accepted proposal is considered a grave insult that could start a war." "A war?" Webb ran his hands through his hair. "Over a handshake gone wrong?" "It wasn't a handshake," Velnara explained patiently. "You touched my most sacred body part. In human terms, it would be like, well, there isn't really a human equivalent. But imagine if a stranger walked up to your leader and kissed them passionately in front of everyone." Torres, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "With respect, ma'am, the captain didn't know. Can't we explain it as a cultural misunderstanding?" Zixthala, who had been listening to their conversation, shook his massive head. "I appreciate the complexity of your situation, humans. However, our laws are clear. The bonding ritual has been completed before witnesses. Captain Webb and Velnara are now considered married under Vorthak law. But what about the trial of compatibility?" Webb asked, grasping at straws. "Ah," Zixthala's eyes lit up with what might have been amusement. "You know of our traditions. Yes, the trial is possible. You have 3 of your Earth days to prove your compatibility. If you succeed, your marriage will be considered blessed and valid. If you fail—" "We get divorced?" Webb asked hopefully. "You will be executed for bringing shame upon our sacred rituals." The silence that followed was broken only by Torres choking on his own saliva. Velnara placed one of her 4 hands on Webb's shoulder in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. "Don't worry, Marcus. May I call you Marcus? The trials aren't that difficult. We just need to demonstrate that we can work together as a team." "What exactly do these trials involve?" Webb asked, dreading the answer. "Oh, the usual things," Velnara said cheerfully. "Physical challenges, mental puzzles, emotional bonding exercises, and—" She paused, her skin shifting to a deeper shade of blue. The traditional sharing of physiological knowledge. Webb closed his eyes and tried to imagine explaining this to Earth Command. When you say physiological knowledge, we must prove we understand each other's bodies well enough to, provide proper care and comfort, Velnara explained. It's quite intimate but necessary for a successful Vorthak marriage. Torres leaned over to Webb and whispered, "Sir, I'm really glad I'm not you right now." "Thanks for the support, Lieutenant," Webb muttered back. As if reading his thoughts, Velnara added, "Oh, and Marcus? The trials must begin within the next 6 hours or they're automatically considered failed." Webb opened his eyes and looked around the chamber at the dozens of Vorthak witnesses who were still watching their every move with intense interest. "Right," he said, trying to muster some semblance of command authority. "Well then, I guess we'd better get started." The trial begins. The first trial took place in what the Vorthak called the Chamber of Synchronized Movement, a vast circular room with walls that seemed to breathe. Webb stood next to Velnara, both of them wearing form-fitting suits that the Vorthak claimed would monitor their harmony levels during the physical challenges. "The rules are simple," announced Zixathala from an observation platform high above them. "You must navigate the maze of trust while maintaining physical contact at all times. If you separate for more than 30 seconds, you fail. If you cannot reach the center within 2 hours, you fail. If your harmony readings drop below acceptable levels, you fail." "And if we fail?" Webb asked, though he already knew the answer. "Immediate execution by disintegration ray," Zixathala replied cheerfully. "Nothing personal, of course, just tradition." Webb turned to Velnara, who was stretching her forearms in preparation. "Any advice on how to do this without getting us both killed?" "Well," she said thoughtfully, "the maze responds to stress and negative emotions by becoming more difficult. The more frustrated or angry we get, the harder it becomes to navigate. We need to stay calm and work together." "Great. No pressure at all." As if summoned by their conversation, walls began rising from the chamber floor, creating a complex labyrinth around them. Some barriers were solid metal, others appeared to be made of energy that crackled ominously when touched. "Ready?" Velnara asked, extending one of her hands to Webb. "As I'll ever be." Webb took her hand, surprised by how warm and surprisingly human-like it felt, despite being slightly larger than his own. They entered the maze together, Webb trying to ignore the way the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The path twisted and turned, sometimes requiring them to crawl through narrow passages while still maintaining contact, other times forcing them to climb over obstacles that required precise coordination. "Left or right?" Webb asked as they came to their first major junction. Velnara closed her eyes for a moment, her free hands moving in subtle gestures. "The maze is bio-responsive. I can sense the living pathways. Left leads to a dead end, but right." She paused. "Right leads toward the center, but there's something challenging waiting for us." "What kind of challenging?" Before she could answer, they heard a low rumble from the right passage. Something large was moving in the darkness ahead of them. "The guardian beast," Velnara said softly. "I should have mentioned that." "Guardian beast?" Webb's voice rose an octave. "What kind of guardian beast?" "Think of it as a large, cranky pet that doesn't like strangers touching its favorite toy. The maze is its favorite toy." A roar echoed through the passage, and Webb could see glowing eyes approaching through the darkness. The creature that emerged looked like someone had crossed a lion with an octopus and then given it anger management issues. It had 6 legs, tentacles where a mane should be, and teeth that glowed with their own inner light. "Okay," Webb said, trying to keep his voice steady. "How do we get past it without becoming dinner?" "We don't fight it," Velnara explained. "We have to show it we're working in harmony. The beast can sense emotional discord. If we're truly synchronized, it will let us pass. And if we're not synchronized, then it eats us." The guardian beast approached slowly, its tentacles writhing as it studied the two of them. Webb could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, but he forced himself to breathe slowly and evenly. "Think calm thoughts," Velnara whispered. Focus. On working together, not on the danger. Easier said than done, Webb thought, but he tried to concentrate on the warmth of Velnara's hand in his, the way she moved with fluid grace, the surprising comfort of having a partner in this insane situation. The beast circled them once, twice, its glowing eyes never leaving their joined hands. Then, to Webb's amazement, it sat back on its haunches and began to purr. The sound was like a diesel engine filled with gravel, but it was definitely a purr. It likes us, Velnara said with obvious relief. We can pass. They walked carefully, past the guardian beast, which watched them with what Webb could only describe as benevolent interest. As they moved deeper into the maze, he found himself actually enjoying the challenge. Velnara was an excellent partner, anticipating his movements and compensating for his limitations with her additional arms. You know, Webb said as they navigated a particularly tricky section that required them to balance on narrow beams while still holding hands. This isn't as terrible as I thought it would be. Careful, Marcus, Velnara replied with what might have been a smile. That almost sounds like you're starting to like me. Well, you haven't tried to kill me yet, which puts you ahead of about half the aliens I've met. They reached the center of the maze just as the 2-hour limit approached. A crystal pillar rose from the floor, pulsing with soft light. Both of them placed their free hands on it simultaneously, and the entire maze began to dissolve around them. Trial 1 complete, Zixthala announced from above. Harmony levels acceptable. Synchronization achieved. You may proceed to Trial 2. As they were transported back to the main chamber, Webb realized he was still holding Velnara's hand. Surprisingly, he didn't particularly want to let go. 1 down, 2 to go, he said. The next trial is mental compatibility, Velnara warned. We'll have to solve complex puzzles while sharing thoughts through a neural link. Sharing thoughts? Webb's stomach dropped. As in, you'll be able to read my mind? And you'll be able to read mine, she confirmed. It can be intimate. Webb looked around the chamber at all the watching Vorthak faces, then back at Velnara. Well, I guess there's no backing out now. No, she agreed. But Marcus? For what it's worth, I'm glad it was you who touched my fertility blessing. You could have been much worse. Thanks, Webb said dryly. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Mind meld mayhem, the chamber of mental unity looked like the inside of a computer designed by someone who'd never seen a computer, but had heard one described by a poet. Crystalline formations jutted from every surface, connected by streams of light that pulsed in hypnotic patterns. In the center of the room stood 2 chairs that looked uncomfortably organic, with tendrils that seemed to move with their own purpose. Second trial, Zixthala announced. Tests your ability to share consciousness while maintaining individual identity. You must solve the paradox of the infinite loop while your minds are linked. Webb eyed the chairs suspiciously. What exactly happens when our minds are linked? You'll experience each other's thoughts, memories, and emotions as if they were your own, explained Velnara. It's quite disorienting at first, but necessary for true Vorthak partnership. Wonderful, Webb muttered. So you'll know about the time I accidentally started a food fight in the academy cafeteria, and you'll know about the time I accidentally set my professor's research notes on fire during my first experiment with quantum flames, Velnara replied, with what he was learning to recognize as her amused expression. They approached the chairs, which began to glow softly as they drew near. Webb settled into his seat and immediately felt tendrils wrapping gently around his wrists and temples. The sensation was oddly soothing, like being embraced by warm silk. Are you ready? Velnara asked from the chair beside him. Before Webb could answer, the world exploded into sensation. Suddenly he was experiencing everything from 2 perspectives at once. He could feel Velnara's 4 hearts beating in a rhythm completely different from his single heart, could sense the electromagnetic fields that she perceived as naturally as he saw colors, could taste the air through chemoreceptors he didn't have. At the same time, he felt Velnara reeling from the strange limitation of having only 2 arms, the weird sensation of binocular vision instead of her natural compound sight. the oddly muffled way humans perceived their environment. "Whoa," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Images flashed between them. Webb saw, felt, experienced Velnara's childhood on a world of floating cities, her years of study in xenodiplomacy, her excitement and nervousness about first contact with humans. In return, she experienced his memories of Earth's blue skies, his pride in earning his first command, his deep-seated fear that he wasn't qualified for this mission. "You think you're not good enough?" Velnara's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You think you're too academic for real-world situations?" Webb replied, understanding flooding through him. "We're both terrified of screwing this up," they said together. A complex holographic puzzle materialized in front of them, a three-dimensional maze of light and mathematics that hurt to look at directly. The paradox of the infinite loop, Webb realized. They had to solve it while maintaining their mental link, using both human logic and Vorthak intuition. "I can see the mathematical relationships," Webb said, his engineering background allowing him to parse the numerical sequences. "But there's something else here, something that doesn't follow normal logic." "Quantum probability matrices," Velnara added, her four arms moving to manipulate different parts of the hologram. "But they're nested inside emotional resonance, patterns. The puzzle isn't just mathematical, it's empathetic. Working together, their linked minds processing information in ways neither could achieve alone, they began to unravel the paradox. Webb's human intuition combined with Velnara's multidimensional thinking, creating solutions that surprised them both. "There," Velnara said, as the final piece clicked into place. The infinite loop was never meant to be broken. It was meant to be embraced. The paradox resolves when you accept that some things are both true and false simultaneously. Like quantum mechanics, Webb added. Or like how this whole situation is both the worst thing that's ever happened to me and somehow also not terrible at all. As the puzzle dissolved, so did their mental link, leaving both of them feeling strangely empty. Webb realized he missed the connection, the sense of truly understanding another being completely. "Trial 2 complete," Zixthala announced. "Mental compatibility achieved. Emotional resonance within acceptable parameters. One more trial," Webb said, though he found himself dreading the end of this bizarre experience. "The trial of physical understanding," Velnara confirmed, her skin shifting to a deeper shade of blue. "This is the most intimate of the three trials." They were led to a smaller, more private chamber lined with soft bioluminescent panels. The room felt warm and safe, like being inside a living cocoon. "For this trial," Zixthala explained, "you must demonstrate complete knowledge of each other's physical forms. You must be able to identify and properly care for each other's pressure points, sensitive areas, and zones of comfort and discomfort." Webb felt his face burning. "When you say demonstrate, you must touch each other in ways that show understanding and care," Velnara explained gently. "It's not sexual, Marcus. It's about trust and knowledge. Can you touch me in ways that bring comfort? Can I do the same for you? A true Vorthak partner must be able to provide physical care and healing." "Like a medical examination?" "More like a dance," she said. "We have 1 hour to show that we understand each other's bodies well enough to provide comfort and healing touch." Webb looked at Velnara, really looked at her for the first time. Beyond the alien features, he could see intelligence, kindness, and a surprising vulnerability. She was trusting him with something deeply personal to her species. "Okay," he said, finally. "Where do we start?" "With trust," Velnara replied, extending all 4 of her hands toward him. "And with the understanding that this is about caring, not conquering." As Webb reached out to take her hands, he realized that somewhere in the past few hours, his perspective had shifted completely. This wasn't just about avoiding execution anymore. Somehow, impossibly, he was starting to care about this strange, wonderful alien who had become his accidental wife. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready?" he replied, and meant it. Part 5. The unexpected truth. The final trial proved to be nothing like what Webb had expected. Instead of the awkward clinical examination he'd feared, it became something surprisingly intimate and healing. Velnara's touch was gentle and precise, her 4 hands working in harmony to locate tension points in his shoulders and neck that he hadn't even realized were there. "Humans carry stress differently than we do," she murmured as she worked. "Your species holds tension in your upper back and jaw. Vorthak stress accumulates in our lower torso and limb joints." Webb found himself naturally reciprocating, his hands finding the spots where her alien physiology held knots of tension. It was strange how intuitive it felt, as if the mental link they'd shared had left him with an understanding of her body that went beyond the physical. "You're very good at this," Velnara said softly as Webb's fingers found a particularly tight spot near her secondary shoulder joint. "So are you," he replied, genuinely surprised by how relaxed he felt. "I haven't felt this comfortable in months." As the hour progressed, their touches became more confident and caring. Webb learned that Vorthak had sensitive nerve clusters behind their auditory organs that responded to gentle pressure, while Velnara discovered that humans found deep pressure along their spine incredibly soothing. "Trial 3 complete," Zixthala announced as their time expired. "Physical compatibility achieved, trust and understanding demonstrated." Webb and Velnara stepped apart, both looking slightly dazed by the experience. "So," Webb said after a moment, "are we officially married?" "Now, according to Vorthak law, yes," Zixthala confirmed. "However," he paused, and Webb could have sworn he saw amusement in the alien's large eyes. "There is something you should know about our marriage customs." "What now?" Webb asked, though he was surprised to find he wasn't particularly worried about the answer. "The trials you just completed," Zixthala continued, "are not actually required for a valid Vorthak marriage. They are traditionally performed by couples who wish to divorce." The chamber fell silent. "I'm sorry, what?" Webb's voice came out as a strangled squeak. "You see," Zixthala explained with obvious enjoyment, "when Velnara accepted your accidental proposal by not vaporizing you, you were already legally married. The trials are typically used to prove that a couple is incompatible and should be separated." "But we passed the trials," Velnara said slowly. "Indeed. Which means, according to our law, you are not only married but perfectly suited for each other. Congratulations on finding your ideal life partner." Webb stared at Zixthala, then at Velnara, then back at Zixthala. "So let me get this straight. We're married whether we pass or fail the trials?" "Correct. And passing the trials just proves we're compatible?" "Also correct. And there's no way to get unmarried?" "Well," Zixthala said thoughtfully, "you could always try touching her fertility blessing again. Sometimes that reverses the process." Webb looked at Velnara's chest, then quickly looked away. "I'm not falling for that again." "Wise choice," Velnara said with a laugh that sounded remarkably like human laughter. "That would actually make us double married, which requires a completely different set of trials." "How many marriage customs do you people have?" Webb asked in exasperation. 47 at last count," Zixthala replied cheerfully. Webb sank down onto a nearby bench, overwhelmed by the absurdity of the situation. "So I'm married to an alien I've known for less than a day. I can't get divorced, and apparently we're perfectly compatible. Is that so terrible?" Velnara asked, settling beside him with fluid grace. Webb considered the question seriously. In the past few hours, he'd experienced more genuine connection and understanding than he'd felt in years. Velnara was intelligent, brave, kind, and surprisingly funny. The fact that she had 4 arms and skin that changed colors seemed like minor details compared to everything else. "You know what?" he said finally. "It's not terrible at all. Weird, completely insane, and definitely not what I planned for my life, but not terrible." "Good," Velnara said, her skin shifting to a warm golden color that Webb was learning indicated happiness. "Because I've grown quite fond of you too, husband." "Husband?" Webb repeated, testing the word. That's going to take some getting used. 2. Captain, Torres's voice crackled through Webb's communicator. Earth Command is requesting a status update on the first contact mission. Webb looked at Velnara, who nodded encouragingly. Torres, tell Earth Command that first contact was successful. We've established a permanent diplomatic relationship with the Vorthak. How permanent, sir? Webb grinned. Very permanent. Oh, and Torres. Send a message to my apartment landlord. Tell him I won't be needing the place anymore. Sir? I'm moving in with my wife. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of someone on the other end of the communication link choking on their coffee. Did you say wife, sir? Yes, Lieutenant, it's a long story. I'll explain later. As Webb closed the communication, Velnara took his hand with one of hers. So what happens now? Now, Webb said, standing up and pulling her with him. We figure out how to make this work. I hear marriage is supposed to be an adventure. With you, Velnara said, her skin cycling through several pleasant colors. I believe it will be the greatest adventure of all. And as they walked out of the chamber together, surrounded by the approving hums of the Vorthak witnesses, Webb realized that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming, especially when they came with 4 arms and the ability to change colors. After all, he thought, if you're going to accidentally get married to an alien, you might as well make sure it's to one who gives great shoulder rubs.